On a rainy April morning in the coastal town of Cedar Cove, the fate of a beloved companion was about to change forever. The storm clouds hung low over Lighthouse Animal Shelter, and the sound of raindrops against the metal roof created a somber melody that matched the mood inside. That morning, a 4-year-old Border Collie named Dash, with a coat as black as midnight save for a perfect white star on his chest, was scheduled for his final appointment. No one could have predicted that the determination of an 8-year-old girl would defy veterinary science and rewrite his destiny. The shelter had been Dash's home for only 3 weeks, but in that short time, he had captured the hearts of everyone who worked there. Before arriving at Lighthouse, Dash had been the pride and joy of the local search and rescue team. His intelligence, agility, and unwavering focus had made him exceptional at finding lost hikers in the dense forests that surrounded Cedar Cove. Local newspapers had featured him twice for locating missing children, and his handler, Officer Sullivan, often said that Dash had a sixth sense for finding people in distress. The bond between Dash and Officer Sullivan was legendary in the small coastal community. They had trained together since Dash was just 8 weeks old, an energetic ball of fur with an unusual capacity for focus. Over the years, they had developed a language of subtle gestures and quiet commands that seemed almost telepathic to observers. Together, they had braved blizzards, scaled treacherous cliffs, and waded through swollen rivers, all in service of bringing lost souls back to their loved ones. "He's not just a dog," Officer Sullivan would say when people complimented Dash's abilities. "He's a better search and rescue worker than most humans I've trained. He doesn't get distracted, doesn't complain about the cold, and never, ever gives. Up until we find who we're looking for." The fateful day that changed everything had started like any other mission. A teenager with autism had wandered away from a family camping trip, and with a storm approaching, time was critical. Dash had picked up the scent immediately, leading the team deep into the forest with unwavering confidence. As they approached a steep ravine, the wind carrying the scent of the missing boy down from the ridge above, Dash had paused, ears perked. Leaned forward, his entire body tense with focus. What happened next occurred in a blur of motion and sound that Officer Sullivan would replay in his mind countless times in the weeks that followed. A massive dead pine, its roots weakened by recent rains, began to fall with a sickening crack. Officer Sullivan saw it coming down directly toward the path where Dash was standing. "Dash! Come!" he had shouted. But in that same moment, Dash had lunged forward, having caught sight of the missing boy on the ridge. The sound of the impact was something Officer Sullivan would never forget. The tree crashed down, catching Dash across his hindquarters. The dog's yelp of pain cut through the forest like a knife. Officer Sullivan had raced forward, his heart in his throat, as other team members called for emergency support. They had managed to lift the tree enough to free Dash, who lay unnaturally still, his breathing shallow. The veterinarian at Cedar Cove Animal Hospital had delivered the devastating news after a series of X-rays and neurological tests. Dash's spinal cord had been severely damaged at the T12-T13 vertebrae. The pressure from the injury had cut off nerve signals to his hindquarters. "I'm sorry," Dr. Patel had said gently, placing a hand on Officer Sullivan's shoulder. "The damage is extensive. He has no deep pain response in his hind legs. In cases like this, especially for working dogs accustomed to high levels of activity, the kindest option is often euthanasia." Officer Sullivan had refused to accept this initially. "He saved that boy's life," he had argued, his voice breaking. The kid was hypothermic but alive, right at the edge of that ravine. If Dash hadn't found him when he did... He couldn't finish the sentence. The thought of losing his partner was unbearable, but the reality of Dash's condition was impossible to ignore. For 2 weeks, Officer Sullivan had taken Dash home, carrying him outside for bathroom breaks, cleaning him when he soiled himself, and researching every possible treatment for canine spinal injuries. He had called specialists across the country, joined online support groups for owners of disabled dogs, and even looked into custom wheelchairs. But as the days passed and Dash showed no improvement, the weight of the situation became increasingly clear. Dash, once vibrant and purposeful, now lay on his bed for hours, his eyes following Officer Sullivan around the room with a mixture of confusion and trust that was almost unbearable to witness. The spark that had made him such an exceptional search and rescue dog seemed to be fading. He wasn't eating well, and despite Officer Sullivan's meticulous care, precious sores were beginning to form where Dash lay immobile for long periods. It was after a particularly difficult night when Dash had cried out repeatedly in what seemed like frustration or pain that Officer Sullivan had made the heart-wrenching decision. With tears streaming down his face, he had called Dr. Patel and scheduled the appointment. However, he couldn't bear the thought of Dash's final moments being in the sterile environment of a veterinary clinic. Instead, he had reached out to Lighthouse Animal Shelter, where his friend Marina worked as the director. "We have a special room for these situations," Marina had explained gently over the phone. "It's peaceful, with windows overlooking the garden. Families can spend as much time as they need to say goodbye. Dr. Patel can come here to perform the procedure." And so, on that rainy April morning, Officer Sullivan had carefully loaded Dash into his SUV for what he believed would be their final journey together. The drive to Lighthouse Animal Shelter had been silent except for the steady rhythm of the windshield wipers and the occasional gentle words Officer Sullivan spoke to his partner. "You've been the best dog anyone could ask for, buddy," he had whispered, reaching back to stroke Dash's ears at a red light. "The best partner, the best friend." Dash had thumped his tail weakly in response, his trusting eyes locked on Officer Sullivan's face in the rearview mirror. Upon arrival at the shelter, Marina had met them with quiet compassion, leading them to the room she had described. It was painted a soft blue, with comfortable furniture and large windows that looked out onto a garden now glistening with rain. A plush dog bed had been placed near the windows, and Marina helped Officer Sullivan transfer Dash onto it. "Dr. Patel won't be here for another hour," Marina had explained. "Take all the time you need. There's water and coffee in the corner if you want it. I'll be just outside if you need anything." With a gentle squeeze of Officer Sullivan's shoulder, she had left them alone. Officer Sullivan had settled on the floor beside Dash, running his hand along the dog's silky head and down his powerful shoulders, coming to rest on the dividing line where sensation ended. "You've been so brave," he had murmured. "So much braver than me." It was in this moment of quiet grief that the door had creaked open, and Officer Sullivan had looked up, expecting to see Marina. Instead, a small figure stood in the doorway, her yellow raincoat still dripping from the downpour outside, purple rain boots squeaking on the floor. "Sorry," the girl had said, her eyes wide as she took in the scene. "My mum's talking to Marina about adopting a cat. I was exploring. Is your dog sick?" Officer Sullivan had nodded, not trusting himself to speak. The girl had stepped fully into the room then, closing the door behind her. She couldn't have been more than 8 years old, with a riot of dark curls escaping from under her raincoat hood and a serious expression that seemed too mature for her small face. "I'm Lily," she had said, approaching cautiously. "Can I pet him? I'm really good with animals. My mum says I'm going to be a veterinarian someday." Something about the child's straightforward manner had been slightly comforting. "His name is Dash," Officer Sullivan had replied. "He used to be a search and rescue dog, but he had an accident. He can't use his back legs anymore." Lily had knelt down beside Dash, her movements slow and gentle. She had reached out a small hand, waiting for Dash to sniff her fingers before she carefully stroked his head. To Officer Sullivan's surprise, Dash had immediately responded to the girl lifting his head slightly to press against her palm. "He's a Border Collie, right?" Lily had asked. "My grandpa had one on his farm. They're super smart. They need jobs to do or they get sad." She had looked up at Officer Sullivan with unnervingly perceptive eyes. Is he going to die because he can't do his job anymore? The blunt question, delivered with a child's directness, had caught Officer Sullivan off guard. "His injuries are very serious," he had explained, choosing his words carefully. "The vet says he won't walk again, and it's hard for him to go to the bathroom properly. He's in pain, and he can't do the things that made him happy." Lily had frowned, her hand never ceasing its gentle stroking of Dash's fur. "My cousin Noah is in a wheelchair," she had said. "He was born that way. He can't walk, but he's really good at wheelchair basketball, and he has this special computer that he controls with his eyes. He says just because someone moves differently doesn't mean they can't have a good life." Officer Sullivan had felt a lump form in his throat. "It's different for dogs," he had tried to explain. "Dash was always moving, always working. That was his purpose." "Maybe he just needs a new purpose," Lily had replied with the simple wisdom that sometimes only children possess. "And some wheels like Noah has." Before Officer Sullivan could respond, the door had opened again, and a woman who was clearly Lily's mother had appeared, looking apologetic. "Lily, I'm so sorry, sir. She wanders off sometimes." "Lily, you can't just walk into rooms without knocking." "It's all right," Officer Sullivan had assured her. "She was just keeping us company." As Lily had reluctantly stood to join her mother, she had leaned down to whisper something in Dash's ear. Then with a small wave, she had allowed herself to be led from the room, leaving Officer Sullivan alone once more with his thoughts and his faithful companion. The encounter had been brief, but something about it lingered in Officer Sullivan's mind as he waited for Dr. Patel to arrive. The simple perspective of the child, untainted by adult pragmatism, kept replaying in his thoughts. "Maybe he just needs a new purpose," she had said, as if the solution could really be that simple. He had gazed down at Dash, who seemed somehow more alert since Lily's visit, his eyes following a raindrop as it traced a path down the window glass. For the first time in weeks, Officer Sullivan found himself wondering not about how to say goodbye, but about what he might be overlooking. What would happen if they didn't give up just yet? When Dr. Patel had finally arrived, medical bag in hand, and expression somber, Officer Sullivan had made a decision that would set in motion a chain of events no one could have anticipated. Instead of proceeding with the planned euthanasia, he had asked for one more consultation, one more opinion, one last chance to find a different path forward for the dog who had saved so many lives, including his own in ways that couldn't be measured. What Officer Sullivan didn't know then was that Lily's brief visit was far from over. In fact, It was just the beginning of an unexpected journey that would challenge everything he thought he knew about healing, purpose, and the remarkable bond between humans and animals. Dr. Patel's expression shifted from compassionate resignation to cautious curiosity as Officer Sullivan explained his change of heart. "I understand your reluctance," she said, setting her medical bag down on a nearby chair. "The bond you share with Dash is exceptional, but I want to be clear about his prognosis. Cases of complete hind limb paralysis with no deep pain response rarely show significant improvement, especially after 2 weeks with no changes." "I know the odds," Officer Sullivan replied, his hand never leaving Dash's fur. "But something that little girl said, it made me realize I've been thinking about this all wrong. I've been focused on what Dash can't do anymore, instead of what he might still be able to do." Dr. Patel nodded thoughtfully, then knelt beside Dash to perform a brief examination. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency as she checked his reflexes and muscle tone. "His overall condition is actually better than I would have expected," she admitted. "You've done an excellent job preventing pressure sores, and his muscle mass hasn't deteriorated as much as I would have anticipated." A flicker of hope kindled in Officer Sullivan's chest. "So what are our options? Real options, not just palliative care until it gets too difficult." Dr. Patel sat back on her heels, considering. "There's a neurologist at Pacific Northwest, veterinary specialists in Portland, Dr. Abrams. He's been doing some innovative work with spinal injuries in working dogs. It's experimental, and I can't promise it would help Dash, but I'll take him there," Officer Sullivan said immediately. "Today, if possible." "It's not that simple," Dr. Patel cautioned. "These treatments are expensive, often not covered by pet insurance, and they require intensive rehabilitation. We're talking about a significant commitment of time, energy, and financial resources with no guarantee of success." Just as Officer Sullivan was about to respond, a soft knock came at the door. Marina peeked in, looking surprised to see the conversation still in progress rather than the somber scene she had expected. "Sorry to interrupt, but there's someone who insists on speaking with you, Mark. She says it's about Dash." Before either Officer Sullivan or Dr. Patel could respond, the door pushed wider, and Lily slipped in past Marina's legs, her mother following with an apologetic expression. "We were about to leave," Lily announced breathlessly, "but I remembered something important." She clutched a tablet in her small hands, her eyes alight with determination. "Lily, honey, we talked about this," her mother began. But Lily was already approaching Officer Sullivan and Dr. Patel with the single-minded focus of a child on a mission. "I told my mom about Dash, and I remembered this video my teacher showed us at school," she explained, turning the tablet so they could see the screen. "It's about dogs like Dash who use special wheelchairs. Look." She tapped the screen and a video began to play. A compilation of disabled dogs using various mobility devices, running on beaches, playing fetch, and navigating hiking trails with their owners. The joy on the dogs' faces was unmistakable, their disabilities seemingly forgotten as they moved with newfound freedom. "See," Lily said triumphantly, "they're different, but they're still happy. My teacher says it's called adaptive equipment. It helps them do dog things, even though their bodies work differently now." Officer Sullivan found himself transfixed by the images on the screen. These dogs, some missing limbs, others clearly paralyzed like Dash, showed none of the depression or diminished quality of life he had feared for his partner. They played, they explored, they connected with their humans. They had found new ways to be dogs. And that's not all, Lily continued, scrolling to another saved page on her tablet. My mom helped me look up more stuff. There's this place called Canine Rehabilitation Institute, where they help dogs learn to use these wheels, and they do special exercises in water so the dogs don't have to put weight on their legs. Dr. Patel leaned forward with professional interest. Hydrotherapy, she murmured. Yes, that can be very effective for maintaining muscle tone and range of motion in paralyzed animals. Lily's mother stepped forward, resting her hands gently on her daughter's shoulders. I'm Jennifer Chen, she introduced herself. I'm a physical therapist at Cedar Cove Medical Center. When Lily told me about Dash, I couldn't help wondering if some of the techniques we use with human spinal cord injury patients might be applicable. Officer Sullivan looked between them all, feeling a strange mixture of hope and uncertainty. So you're saying there are options? Real options? There are always options, Jennifer replied with the quiet confidence of someone who had helped many patients navigate difficult recoveries. They may not be perfect. They may not restore Dash to exactly how he was before, but they could give him a good quality of life. Dr. Patel nodded slowly. As I was saying before, there are specialists who focus on cases like Dash's, and Jennifer's right. The field of canine rehabilitation has advanced significantly in recent years. Marina, who had been listening from the doorway, spoke up. We have a partnership with Pacific Northwest veterinary specialists. I can make a call, see if Dr. Abrams can fit Dash in for a consultation. And I can reach out to some colleagues who work with service dogs, Jennifer offered. They might have contacts in canine physical therapy, maybe even experience with similar cases. Officer Sullivan felt overwhelmed by the sudden shift from saying goodbye to planning a rehabilitation strategy. He looked down at Dash, who had perked up noticeably during the conversation, his eyes tracking each speaker with the intelligent focus that had made him such an exceptional search and rescue dog. What do you think, buddy? He asked softly. Should we give this a try? As if in answer, Dash lifted his head and gave a small but definite wag of his tail. Lily beamed. He said yes. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of appointments, consultations, and research. Dr. Abrams at Pacific Northwest Veterinary Specialists conducted a thorough examination of Dash, including advanced imaging that provided a clearer picture of his spinal injury. The good news, Dr. Abrams explained, pointing to areas on the MRI scan displayed on his computer screen, is that while there is significant damage to the spinal cord, it's not a complete transection. There are some intact neural pathways, which explains why Dash still has some movement in his tail. What does that mean for his recovery? Officer Sullivan asked, trying to interpret the complex images. It means there's potential, Dr. Abrams replied cautiously. I won't promise miracles. He may never walk normally again. But with aggressive rehabilitation, he could regain some function. More importantly, we can definitely improve his quality of life, with or without full recovery of mobility. Tattoo. Comprehensive treatment plan Dr. Abrams outlined was daunting. Twice weekly hydrotherapy sessions, daily physical therapy exercises, possible acupuncture, and a custom-fitted wheelchair to provide immediate mobility while they worked on neural recovery. The cost was substantial and the time commitment significant. I know it's a lot to consider, Dr. Abrams said, noting Officer Sullivan's expression. Take some time to think it through. But Officer Sullivan didn't need time. The moment he had decided not to euthanize Dash, he had committed to whatever came next. "When can we start?" he asked. What Officer Sullivan hadn't expected was the community response when word spread about Dash's situation. The Cedar Cove search and rescue team, where Dash was something of a mascot, immediately organized a fundraiser to help cover the medical expenses. Local businesses contributed, and the story of the heroic dog who had saved lives and now needed saving himself touched hearts throughout the community. Perhaps most surprising was the continued involvement of Lily and her mother. Jennifer had reached out to colleagues specializing in neurological rehabilitation, adapting human therapy techniques for Dash's needs. And Lily, with her unwavering belief in Dash's recovery, had appointed herself his unofficial morale officer. "Dogs can get sad when they're hurt," she explained seriously to Officer Sullivan during one of her visits. "My grandpa's Border Collie got really mopey when she had to wear a cone after surgery, so Dash needs extra fun things to keep his brain busy while his body gets better." Taking this self-assigned responsibility to heart, Lily had arrived with a bag full of puzzle toys designed to challenge Dash's intelligence and provide mental stimulation. "Border Collies are super smart," she informed anyone who would listen. "They need jobs, or they get bored and destructive. That's what my book about dog breeds says." The physical therapy sessions began in earnest, with Dash initially resistant and confused. The first time they lowered him into the hydrotherapy tank, supported by a special harness, he had panicked, his front legs paddling frantically while his hind legs drifted uselessly. "This is normal," the rehabilitation specialist had assured Officer Sullivan. "He doesn't understand what we're trying to do yet. But dogs are adaptable. He'll get used to it." True to prediction, by the third session, Dash had begun to relax. In the water, allowing the therapist to gently move his back legs through the motions of walking. There was no voluntary movement yet, but the passive exercise prevented muscle atrophy and maintained joint flexibility. The fitting for Dash's wheelchair had been another milestone. The technician had taken careful measurements, explaining how the custom device would support Dash's hindquarters while allowing his front legs to propel him forward. "The goal is to give him independence right away," she explained, "while we continue working on recovery." Many dogs adapt to these devices remarkably quickly. Their desire to move and explore overcomes their initial hesitation. When the wheelchair finally arrived 2 weeks later, the whole team gathered for Dash's first trial. Officer Sullivan carefully placed Dash's hind legs in the supportive slings, adjusted the straps across his back, and secured the lightweight frame. "Okay, buddy," he said, his voice encouraging but tense with anticipation. "Let's see how this feels." At first, Dash just stood still, seemingly confused by the strange apparatus attached to his body. He tried to look back at it, turning in a small circle that caused the wheels to roll slightly. The unexpected movement startled him, and he froze. "Again, give him time," Dr. Abrams advised. "This is all new." Officer Sullivan knelt in front of Dash, holding out his favorite tennis ball. "Come on, Dash, you can do this." Dash stared at the ball, his Border Collie instincts warring with his uncertainty about his new equipment. His ears perked forward, and he took a tentative step with his front paws. The wheels rolled smoothly following the movement, another step, then another, each one a little more confident than the last. "He's doing it!" Lily exclaimed from where she watched with her mother. Gradually, over the course of several minutes, Dash's initial hesitation gave way to experimentation. He moved forward, stopped, turned, and even managed a short trot across the rehabilitation center's padded floor. Each successful movement seemed to boost his confidence further. By the end of the session, Dash was navigating around the room with growing ease, the bright red wheelchair becoming an extension of himself rather than a foreign object to be feared. When Officer Sullivan finally removed the device, however, the contrast was stark. Dash's hind legs remained limp and unresponsive on the floor, a reminder of how far they still had to go. "This is just the beginning," Jennifer reminded Officer Sullivan, seeing his momentary flash of disappointment. Neural recovery is a slow process, and regardless of how much function he regains, the wheelchair gives him freedom in the meantime. As they packed up to leave the rehabilitation center that day, Dr. Abrams pulled Officer Sullivan aside. "There's something else I'd like to discuss with you," he said. "I've been thinking about Dash's future, even if this therapy is successful." "What do you mean?" Officer Sullivan asked. "Search and rescue work requires a level of agility and independence that may not be realistic, even with the best outcome," Dr. Abrams explained gently. "I think it's important to start considering alternative ways for Dash to use his considerable intelligence and training." The words hit Officer Sullivan hard. Despite the progress they'd made, he had been clinging to the hope that somehow Dash might return to his former role. The suggestion that this might never happen forced him to confront a reality he had been avoiding. What else could he do? He asked, his voice rougher than he intended. Being a search and rescue dog is who he is. It's what he loves. Dr. Abrams regarded him thoughtfully. What Dash loves is working with you, using his mind, having purpose. There are many forms that could take. As they walked to the car, Dash rolling along confidently in his new wheelchair, Officer Sullivan found himself facing the hardest challenge yet, reimagining a future different from the one he had planned, not just for Dash, but for himself as well. It was a journey neither of them had chosen, but one they would need to navigate together, one step or roll at a time. The conversation with Dr. Abrams weighed heavily on Officer Sullivan's mind as he drove home with Dash. The Border Collie had settled comfortably in the back of the SUV, his new wheelchair disassembled and stored beside him. Every few minutes, Sullivan would glance in the rearview mirror, checking on his partner. Dash seemed more alert than he had in weeks, his eyes bright and attentive as he watched the familiar scenery passing by. "A new purpose," Sullivan murmured to himself, echoing both Lily's words from their first meeting and Dr. Abrams' suggestion. The concept was still difficult to grasp. Search and rescue wasn't just something Dash did. It was woven into the fabric of their relationship, their daily routines, their shared identity. Imagining a different path felt like abandoning something sacred. As they pulled into the driveway of Sullivan's modest lakeside cabin, his phone chimed with a text message. It was from Jennifer Chen. "Lily has an idea she's very excited about. Any chance we could stop by tomorrow after Dash's therapy session? She's been working on something she wants to show you both." Sullivan smiled despite his melancholy mood. In the 3 weeks since their chance encounter at Lighthouse Animal Shelter, Lily had become Dash's most devoted champion. Her enthusiasm never wavering even on days when progress seemed minimal. He texted back a quick agreement before unloading Dash and his new equipment. Getting into a routine with the wheelchair had been a learning process for both of them. Sullivan carefully lifted Dash from the vehicle, set up the wheelchair on the gravel driveway, and secured his partner into the device. There was a growing confidence in Dash's movements now as he navigated the familiar path to the front door, the wheels crunching over the small stones. "Good boy," Sullivan praised, unlocking the door and holding it open as Dash rolled through with surprising agility. They had made modifications to the cabin, removing area rugs that might catch on the wheels, rearranging furniture to create wider pathways, and setting up a specialized dog bed that would allow Dash to transition comfortably between his wheelchair and rest periods. That evening followed their new routine: exercises to maintain range of motion in Dash's hind legs, practice with the wheelchair around the larger space of the living room, and focused attention activities to keep Dash's mind engaged. The Border Collie responded with the same dedication he had always shown during search and rescue training, his eyes never leaving Sullivan's face as he followed each instruction. Later, as Dash dozed on his specialized bed, Sullivan sat at his kitchen table, laptop open before him, researching the concept Dr. Abrams had mentioned: alternative careers for dogs with disabilities. The search results were surprisingly extensive, revealing a world he had never considered. There were therapy dogs who visited hospitals despite being in wheelchairs themselves, their own challenges creating unique connections with patients facing similar struggles. Service dogs who alerted to seizures or detected changes in blood sugar, their physical limitations irrelevant to their keen senses and intelligence. Even dogs who worked in educational settings, helping children learn about disability and adaptation. "Maybe there is a way forward," Sullivan whispered, glancing at his sleeping partner. For the first time since the accident, he allowed himself to truly believe they might find a new chapter rather than simply an ending. The next day's physical therapy session showed modest progress. Under the guidance of the rehabilitation specialist, Dash spent 20 minutes in the hydrotherapy tank, his legs being gently manipulated through the motions of walking. There was no voluntary movement, but Sullivan thought he detected less resistance in the joints, a slightly improved muscle. "Tone. Patience is key with neurological injuries," the specialist reminded him. "The brain and spinal cord operate on their own timelines. We're creating optimal conditions for healing, but we can't rush the process." After therapy, Sullivan loaded Dash back into the SUV for the short drive to Jennifer Chen's home as arranged. They lived in a cheerful blue bungalow, not far from the lake, with a fenced backyard that sloped gently toward a small stream. Lily was waiting on the front porch, bouncing with barely contained excitement as they pulled into the driveway. "You're here," she called, racing down the steps as Sullivan helped Dash into his wheelchair. "Mom, they're here!" Jennifer emerged from the house, smiling at her daughter's enthusiasm. "Thanks for coming. Lily's been working on this project all week, and she's about to burst if she doesn't share it soon." "Can I show them now?" Lily pleaded, already leading the way around the side of the house toward the backyard. "Let Officer Sullivan and Dash get settled first," Jennifer advised, but Sullivan waved off the concern. "We're ready when you are," he assured them, following Lily with Dash rolling confidently beside him. The backyard had been transformed. A series of colorful stations were set up across the gently sloping grass, each marked with hand-painted signs. Sullivan recognized some, the equipment similar to what they used in Dash's therapy sessions, but arranged in what appeared to be a course or circuit. "I made a Dash training center," Lily announced proudly, gesturing to the setup. "Or actually, it's an ability center." Mom helped with some of the building parts, but I designed everything. Sullivan took in the scene, noting the obvious care, and thought that had gone into each station. It's impressive, Lily. Can you tell us about it? Lily drew herself up importantly, clearly having rehearsed this moment. So I was thinking about what my teacher says about differently abled people, that they're not disabled, they just have different abilities. And I thought maybe Dash needs to discover his different abilities now. She led them to the first station, which featured a series of large, colorful buttons spread out on a low platform. This is the target station. See, each button makes a different sound when pressed. I think Dash could learn to press specific buttons with his nose when you give him commands. Moving to the next station, she pointed out a collection of scent containers arranged in rows. This is the smell station. Border Collies have amazing noses, even if their back legs don't work. I put different scents in each container. Some are just smells like cinnamon and lemon, but some are pieces of clothing from different people. I thought maybe Dash could learn to find specific scents and alert you. Sullivan felt a lump forming in his throat as he began to understand what Lily was creating. Not just a play area, but a comprehensive training course designed to help Dash develop new skills that accommodated his condition. The remaining stations included a puzzle area with treat-dispensing toys of varying complexity, a modified agility course with elements Dash could navigate in his wheelchair, and even a small pool with a gentle ramp entry. The water feels nice on his legs, right? Lily explained. And he can swim without the wheelchair. Mom says swimming is good therapy. Jennifer, who had been watching from the sidelines, stepped forward. Lily's been researching service dogs and therapy work. She thinks Dash has potential. I made this too, Lily added, pulling a folder from behind one of the stations. Inside was a carefully drawn chart with various skills listed down one side and days of the week across the top. It's a training plan. We can track his progress and see what he's best at. Sullivan knelt down to examine the chart, marveling at the detail. Skills were categorized by type: scent detection, alerting behaviors, comfort therapy, cognitive tasks, with space to record progress and notes. It was astonishingly comprehensive for something created by an 8-year-old, even with adult guidance. Lily's always been interested in working dogs, Jennifer explained. When she heard about Dash's background and his current challenges, she dove into research. I've helped with some resources, but the ideas are all hers. Sullivan looked at Dash, who was showing interest in the scent station, his nose twitching as he detected the various aromas. Despite his paralysis, his herding instincts remained intact. He was already problem-solving, analyzing, categorizing information as he had been trained to do. Would you like to try some of the stations? Lily asked hopefully. I can show you how they work. The next hour passed in a blur of activity as Lily guided them through each element of her training center. To Sullivan's amazement, Dash responded with enthusiasm, particularly to the scent identification exercises. When presented with 5 containers and instructed to find the one containing a piece of Sullivan's uniform, he identified it without hesitation, pressing his nose against it firmly. He remembers his search training, Lily exclaimed. See, his brain still works perfectly even if his legs don't. Sullivan felt a strange mixture of emotions: pride in Dash's abilities, gratitude for Lily's intervention, and a growing sense that perhaps Dr. Abrams had been right. Maybe there was a future for Dash that honored his intelligence and training while adapting to his new physical reality. As the afternoon light began to fade, they gathered on Jennifer's back porch. Dash had tired but seemed more animated than Sullivan had seen him since the accident. His eyes bright and focused rather than listless or confused. "What do you think?" Jennifer asked quietly, watching her daughter demonstrate yet another training technique to the attentive Border Collie. "I think your daughter might be something of a miracle worker," Sullivan admitted. "I haven't seen Dash this engaged since before the injury." Jennifer smiled. "Lily sees possibilities where adults often see limitations. It's a gift." She hesitated, then added, "I've been thinking about what she's put together here. With some refinement, this could be a real training program for Dash, and potentially for other dogs in similar situations." Sullivan considered this. "What exactly are you suggesting?" "I work with patients recovering from traumatic injuries," Jennifer explained. "Many of them struggle not just physically, but emotionally. The depression that often accompanies sudden disability can be as debilitating as the physical limitations." She glanced at Dash, who was successfully completing another scent identification task under Lily's guidance. "Therapy animals can make a tremendous difference, and one who has overcome his own physical challenges that could create a powerful connection." The idea took root in Sullivan's mind, expanding to fill the void that had been left when he'd accepted that Dash's search and rescue career was over. A therapy dog, not just any therapy dog, but one who embodied resilience and adaptation, who could connect with patients in a unique and profound way. "Do you think he could really do it?" Sullivan asked, watching as Dash navigated between the training stations with growing confidence in his wheelchair. "I think he already is," Jennifer replied simply. As they prepared to leave, Lily approached with a serious expression. "Can I come see Dash again? I have more ideas for training exercises." Sullivan smiled. "I think Dash would be very disappointed if you didn't." Lily beamed, then knelt beside Dash to address him directly. "You're doing great," she told him earnestly. "I knew you could find a new purpose. You're gonna be the best therapy dog ever." On the drive home, Sullivan found himself viewing the future with newfound clarity. The path ahead would be different from what he had imagined for himself and Dash, but it no longer felt like a lesser alternative, just a different kind of important. The next morning, Sullivan made 2 phone calls. The first was to Dr. Abrams, discussing the potential of transitioning Dash toward therapy dog certification once his physical rehabilitation had progressed further. The second was to his supervisor at the Search and Rescue Unit, requesting information about opportunities for community outreach and education programs. "I'm thinking about developing a presentation on resilience and adaptation," he explained. With Dash as the centerpiece, of course, his supervisor was immediately enthusiastic. "We've had requests from schools and community centers for exactly that kind of program. And honestly, Mark, I think Dash's story could do a lot of good. People need to see that setbacks don't have to be endings." As Sullivan hung up the phone, he looked over at Dash, who was practicing maneuvering his wheelchair through a narrow passage between the kitchen and living room, his focus intense. "What do you think, buddy?" he asked. "Ready to try a new kind of rescue work?" Dash paused, looking back at his partner with the same intelligent attention he had always given to search operations. Then decisively, he moved forward, wheels rolling smoothly across the threshold into whatever came next. The following weeks brought a steady rhythm of rehabilitation sessions, training exercises, and gradual adaptations to their new reality. 3 days a week, Sullivan would bring Dash to the Veterinary Rehabilitation Center for his professional therapy. The hydrotherapy sessions had become the highlight of these visits, with Dash now actively engaging in the water, his front legs paddling powerfully while the therapist guided his hind legs through the motions of swimming. "I'm seeing some improvement in muscle tone," the rehabilitation specialist noted during their 5th week of treatment. She ran her hands along Dash's hind legs as he rested on the examination table after his swim. "And there's definitely better reflex response in the left hind leg." Sullivan tried to temper his hopes. "Does that mean he might regain some function?" "It's too early to make predictions," she cautioned, "but these are positive signs. The neural pathways are still trying to re-establish connections." On the days they weren't at the rehabilitation center, Sullivan would take Dash to Jennifer and Lily's backyard training center, which had grown more sophisticated with each passing week. Lily had continued researching and developing new training, exercises, consulting with her mother's colleagues in physical and occupational therapy to adapt human rehabilitation techniques for Dash's needs. "I read about something called proprioceptive training," Lily announced one afternoon, carefully pronouncing the complex term. "It helps the brain remember where body parts are supposed to be in space. Mom's patients do it after strokes. I think Dash could try it too." The exercises she had designed involved placing lightweight bands around Dash's hind legs and creating resistance that would send sensory information up to his brain, even if he couldn't yet control the movement. Sullivan marveled at the child's intuitive understanding of rehabilitation principles and her unwavering belief in Dash's recovery. Beyond the physical therapy, Dash's training for a potential new career was progressing remarkably well. His search and rescue background had given him a solid foundation of discipline, focus, and problem-solving abilities that transferred effectively to therapy work. He quickly learned to identify and respond to emotional cues, pressing his body against someone showing signs of distress or placing his head gently in their lap. "He's a natural," Jennifer observed after watching Dash comfort a visibly stressed delivery person who had arrived during one of their training sessions. "Some therapy dogs have to be taught these responses, but he seems to have an innate sensitivity." Sullivan nodded, pride swelling in his chest. He always had good instincts for finding people in distress during search operations. "I guess that part of him is still intact." The most unexpected development came 6 weeks into their new routine. Sullivan had brought Dash home after a particularly intensive therapy session. Exhausted, the Border Collie had fallen asleep almost immediately upon being removed from his wheelchair and placed on his specialized bed. Sullivan had used this quiet time to catch up on emails, half listening to a podcast about canine rehabilitation success stories. A sudden noise from Dash's direction had caught his attention. Not the usual shifting or sighing of a sleeping dog, but something different. Sullivan had looked up to see Dash's left hind leg twitching slightly. This wasn't unusual. Muscle spasms had occurred sporadically since the injury. But as Sullivan watched, the movement became more pronounced, more rhythmic, almost like the paddling motion Dash made during hydrotherapy. Heart racing, Sullivan had approached slowly, not wanting to wake Dash if he was dreaming. The movement continued, subtle but unmistakable. It wasn't a spasm, it appeared coordinated, synchronized with the slight movements of Dash's front legs as he dreamed, presumably, of running. "Dr. Abrams needs to see this," Sullivan had whispered, carefully, recording a video on his phone. He'd sent it immediately to the neurologist with a message asking what it might mean. The response had come within the hour. "This is encouraging. Motor patterns are sometimes preserved in the spinal cord even when voluntary control is lost. When the conscious mind is relaxed during sleep, these patterns can sometimes emerge. Keep up with the therapy. The neural pathways are definitely still attempting to communicate." That night had marked a turning point in Sullivan's approach to Dash's recovery. What had begun as a journey to help his partner adapt to a permanent disability shifted subtly toward the possibility, however remote, of genuine recovery. Not a miracle cure. Dr. Abrams had been clear about maintaining realistic expectations, but perhaps more progress than they had initially dared to hope for. As spring transitioned into early summer, Dash's story began to spread throughout Cedar Cove and beyond. Local media had picked up on the fundraising efforts, running a feature about the heroic search and rescue dogfighting for a second chance. The story had resonated particularly strongly in a community that depended on search and rescue operations to keep visitors to their wilderness areas safe. The publicity had an unexpected benefit. A renowned veterinary neurosurgeon from Seattle read about Dash's case and reached out to Dr. Abrams, offering to consult on the treatment plan. Her expertise in spinal cord injuries led to adjustments in Dash's medication regimen and therapy, protocols that seemed to accelerate his progress. "The research in this field is evolving rapidly," she explained during a video consultation that included Sullivan, Dr. Abrams, and Jennifer. "We're seeing recovery patterns in canines with spinal injuries that would have been considered impossible just 5 years ago. Dogs are remarkably adaptable, and their neural plasticity, their ability to create new neural pathways, exceeds what we see in many other mammals." The consultation had provided not just medical insights, but also a connection to an experimental, a program at the University of Washington's Veterinary School, where researchers were studying recovery patterns in working dogs with spinal injuries. Dash was invited to participate, which would give him access to cutting-edge treatments while contributing to research that might help other injured dogs in the future. It would involve weekly visits to Seattle, Dr. Abrams explained. "That's a significant commitment." Sullivan hadn't hesitated. "If it could help Dash and help other dogs like him, we'll make it work." The first assessment at the university program had been comprehensive and enlightening. Sophisticated equipment measured the faint electrical signals still being transmitted through Dash's damaged spinal cord, creating a detailed map of which neural pathways remained partially intact. "There's more connectivity than we typically see in cases with his clinical presentation," the research veterinarian had noted, studying the results. "Especially on the left side. That explains the movement you've observed during sleep and the improving reflex responses." The program introduced new elements to Dash's rehabilitation, electrical stimulation therapy that sent mild currents through specific muscle groups, a robotic exoskeleton that moved his hind legs through precise walking motions while he was suspended in a harness, and experimental medication that targeted neural inflammation at the injury site. Each week brought subtle changes The twitching in Dash's left hind leg became more pronounced and began occurring occasionally during waking hours, especially when he was highly focused on a training task. His right leg showed less improvement but had better muscle tone and reflexive responses than before. Throughout this intensifying medical journey, Lily remained Dash's most devoted supporter outside of Sullivan himself. She had begun accompanying them to the local therapy sessions, carefully documenting every sign of progress in a journal decorated with hand-drawn paw prints. Her presence seemed to energize Dash, who worked with particular focus when she was offering encouragement. "I think he's trying extra hard to impress you," Sullivan told her one afternoon as they watched Dash navigate an increasingly complex obstacle course in his wheelchair. Lily had smiled at this, but shook her head. "He's not doing it for me. He's doing it because he remembers who he is." The wisdom in her simple statement had struck Sullivan deeply. That was exactly it. Dash was fighting so hard not just to please humans or even to regain physical function, but because something in him remembered his purpose, his identity, his joy in working and helping others. This realization had strengthened Sullivan's commitment to finding Dash a new purpose that honored that essential part of him, regardless of how much physical recovery he ultimately achieved. The opportunity to put this new purpose into action came sooner than expected. Jennifer, whose work at the medical center involved coordinating with various therapy services, approached Sullivan after one of Dash's training sessions at their backyard facility. "We have a patient I'd like you to consider meeting with," she began carefully. "A 12-year-old boy named Ethan, who was injured in a mountain biking accident 3 months ago. The spinal cord damage was significant. He's currently using a wheelchair and struggling with the adjustment." Sullivan waited, sensing there was more to the request. He was an extremely active child before the accident. Competitive sports, hiking, always in motion. The physical limitations have been difficult enough, but the psychological impact has been devastating. He's refusing to engage with therapy, won't discuss adaptive sports options, and has become increasingly withdrawn. "And you think meeting Dash might help?" Sullivan asked. Jennifer nodded. His therapist suggested it when she heard about Dash through the hospital grapevine. Sometimes children can process their own situations more effectively when they see parallels in others, especially animals. Seeing Dash adapting, using his wheelchair but still engaged and purposeful, it might open a door. Sullivan considered the request. Dash's formal therapy dog certification was still in progress, but the hospital had programs that allowed for carefully supervised animal visits, particularly in cases where there was a specific therapeutic objective. "Dash has always had good instincts with people in distress," Sullivan said finally. "I think he could handle it." The visit was arranged for the following week. Ethan's parents were cautiously hopeful, warning that their son might be dismissive or unresponsive, but grateful for any attempt to break through his isolation. Sullivan prepared carefully, making sure Dash was well rested and comfortable in his wheelchair. Lily, upon hearing about the planned visit, had insisted on creating what she called a courage kit for Ethan. A small package containing a hand-drawn card showing Dash in his wheelchair jumping over obstacles, and a braided cord similar to the one she had made for Dash's harness for good luck. The pediatric rehabilitation wing of Cedar Cove Medical Center was bright and colorful, designed to feel as little like a hospital as possible. Jennifer met them in the lobby, her face a mixture of hope and concern. "He's having a particularly difficult day," she warned them quietly. "Don't be discouraged if he doesn't engage much." Sullivan nodded, then knelt to address Dash directly. "We're here to help someone who's hurting," he said softly, the same words he had used before search and rescue missions. "Do what you do best, okay?" Dash's expression was alert and focused, his posture straightening as if he recognized the importance of the task ahead. Together, they followed Jennifer down the hallway toward what would become a pivotal encounter, not just for Ethan, but for Dash's new purpose as well. Ethan's room was at the end of the corridor, distinguishable from the others by the conspicuous absence of personalization. While neighboring doors displayed colorful name signs and artwork, his remained bare metal and institutional beige. The blinds were drawn despite the beautiful summer day outside, casting the room in a dim half-light that matched the mood of its occupant. Jennifer knocked gently before entering. "Ethan, you have some visitors if you're up for it." From inside came a non-committal grunt that Jennifer apparently took as sufficient permission. She pushed the door open wider, motioning for Sullivan and Dash to follow. The boy sat in his wheelchair by the window, his back to the door. He didn't turn as they entered, his attention seemingly fixed on the narrow strip of sky visible between the partially closed blinds. At 12, Ethan was at that awkward threshold between childhood and adolescence, his frame still boyish, but beginning to show the angles of approaching teenage years. Dark hair fell across his forehead, slightly too long, as if haircuts had become an irrelevant concern. "This is Officer Sullivan and his partner Dash that I told you about," Jennifer continued, her voice warm but not overly cheerful, a tone that acknowledged the reality of the situation without reinforcing the gloom. Ethan remained motionless for a moment, then slowly swiveled his chair to face them. His eyes, wary and guarded, went immediately to Dash in his wheelchair. A flicker of something, surprise, curiosity, perhaps both, crossed his face before he schooled his expression back to studied indifference. "Whatever," he said, though his gaze remained fixed on Dash. Sullivan recognized the defense mechanism, the need to appear unaffected, unmoved, when in fact the opposite was true. He'd seen it in victims they'd rescued, in witnesses to trauma, in himself during difficult times. Rather than addressing Ethan directly, he focused on making Dash comfortable, giving the boy space to observe without pressure. "Let's give Dash a minute to get oriented," he said casually, helping his partner navigate around a chair. New environments can be a lot to process, especially for a working dog. He's assessing everything. This approach, treating the visit as primarily about Dash rather than about Ethan, seemed to reduce some of the tension in the room. The boy watched as the Border Collie moved confidently in his wheelchair, the wheels making a soft, whirring sound against the linoleum floor. "What happened to him?" Ethan asked finally, the question directed at no one in particular. Sullivan settled into a chair, positioning himself at an angle that didn't confront Ethan directly, but allowed for conversation. He was on a search and rescue mission. That was his job. A tree fell during a storm and damaged his spine. The injury paralyzed his hind legs. Ethan's eyes narrowed slightly, and he just accepted it. The wheelchair and everything. "Not at first," Sullivan admitted, seeing no reason to sugarcoat the reality. The initial weeks were tough. He was confused, frustrated. Border Collies are working dogs. They need purpose, activity, challenges. Suddenly being immobile was devastating for him. This frank acknowledgement of Dash's struggle seemed to resonate with Ethan. He glanced toward Jennifer, then back to Dash, who had completed his exploration of the room, and now sat alertly beside Sullivan. "So what changed?" Ethan asked, trying to maintain his disinterested tone, but failing to mask his curiosity. Sullivan nodded toward Jennifer. "We got help, people with expertise and perspectives we didn't have, and Dash got this custom wheelchair. That gave him back his mobility while we worked on his recovery." "Recovery?" Ethan seized on the word. "You mean he's going to walk again?" The question carried a weight beyond simple curiosity, and Sullivan chose his words carefully. "We don't know for certain. He's shown some promising signs, reflex responses, some movement during sleep, improved muscle tone. He's part of an experimental program at the university that's studying spinal cord injuries in dogs." Sullivan paused, then added, "But the wheelchair isn't just a temporary solution. It's a tool that gives him freedom and independence right now, regardless of how much function he ultimately regains." Ethan absorbed this, his fingers unconsciously tracing the rim of his own wheelchair. "Can I?" He hesitated, then pushed forward. "Can I see how it works? His chair, I mean." "Of course." Sullivan moved closer, explaining the specialized harness system and lightweight frame. It's balanced to work with his natural movement patterns. His front legs provide the power, and the wheels support his hindquarters. The design distributes his weight to prevent pressure sores. As Sullivan demonstrated features of the wheelchair, Dash remained patiently in place, seemingly understanding the importance of this interaction. Ethan's questions became more specific, more engaged, revealing a mind that was both analytical and practical. How does he go to the bathroom? Does he sleep in it? Can he go on different terrains, like grass or gravel? Sullivan answered each question honestly, neither minimizing the challenges nor exaggerating the successes. Dash's rehabilitation was a complex journey with both triumphs and setbacks, and he sensed that Ethan would respond better to authenticity than to a sanitized version of their experience. Gradually, the conversation shifted from the mechanics of Dash's wheelchair to his training and daily life. Sullivan explained the therapy sessions, the exercises designed to maintain muscle tone, and the new skills Dash was developing. "He's actually training for therapy dog certification now," Sullivan explained, using his experience to help others who are facing challenges. "Like me, you mean?" Ethan said flatly, the walls beginning to rise again. "Like anyone who might benefit from connecting with him," Sullivan corrected gently. "Dash doesn't approach people as problems to be fixed. He just offers companionship and understanding in a way that's unique to him." As if on cue, Dash moved forward slightly, positioning himself closer to Ethan's wheelchair. Without being directed, he placed his head on the boy's knee, looking up with the calm, steady gaze that had always been his hallmark during rescue operations. The simple gesture, offered freely without prompting, seemed to catch Ethan off guard. His hand hovered uncertainly for a moment before settling lightly on Dash's head. The Border Collie remained still, accepting the tentative touch without demanding more. "He usually doesn't approach people unless invited," Sullivan noted quietly. "He must sense something in you that he connects with." Ethan's throat worked as he swallowed hard. "How do you know when to stop hoping they'll find a cure and just accept things how they are now?" The question hung in the air, raw and honest. Jennifer, who had maintained a respectful distance during the interaction, moved slightly as if to step in, but Sullivan gave a nearly imperceptible shake of his head. "I don't think those are mutually exclusive," he replied carefully. Dash is doing everything possible to recover function. The therapy, the experimental treatments. We work at it every single day, but at the same time, he's fully living his life as he is right now. He's not putting anything on hold. Sullivan leaned forward slightly. The wheelchair isn't a surrender. It's a tool that gives him freedom while his body does whatever healing it's capable of. Ethan continued stroking Dash's head, his movements becoming more natural. My doctors keep talking about realistic expectations and adjusting to a new normal. I hate that phrase, new normal. Like I'm supposed to be okay with everything changing overnight. I don't think anyone expects you to be okay with it. Sullivan said honestly, what happened to you was profound and life-altering. Being angry, being devastated, those are natural responses. Then what am I supposed to do with all of this? Ethan gestured vaguely at his wheelchair, his room, the reality of his situation. I can only tell you what worked for Dash, Sullivan replied. Finding a new purpose didn't erase what happened or make it fair, but it gave him a way forward, a reason to keep engaging with the world. The conversation might have continued in this philosophical vein, if not for a slight commotion. In the doorway, Lily appeared slightly out of breath, having apparently arrived late from a summer day camp activity. Her mother gave her a mildly exasperated look. Sorry, arts and crafts ran long, Lily explained, before noticing Ethan. Oh, hi, I'm Lily. I help train Dash. She approached without hesitation, apparently unbothered by the potentially awkward situation. You must be Ethan. Mom told me Dash was coming to meet you today. Ethan seemed taken aback by this whirlwind entrance, his hand still resting on Dash's. Ed. Yeah, that's me. Lily is our canine rehabilitation specialist in training, Sullivan explained with a small smile. She's been instrumental in Dash's recovery program. You're the one who designed his training course, right? Ethan asked, surprising them all with the revelation that he'd been paying attention to the details Jennifer had shared about Dash's story. Lily beamed. Yes! It has different stations for different skills. The scent station is his favorite, but he's really good at the target buttons too. She studied Dash, who remained positioned by Ethan's chair. He likes you. He doesn't usually stay that still with new people. Ethan looked down at the Border Collie. Officer Sullivan said the same thing. That's because we both know Dash really well, Lily said matter-of-factly. He's picky about who he bonds with. It's a Border Collie. They're super smart and kind of particular. This straightforward assessment, delivered with a child's honesty, seemed to affect Ethan more than any of the carefully constructed conversations with adults had. I used to have a dog, he said suddenly, a golden retriever named Cooper. He lives with my dad now because of all this. He gestured to his wheelchair in the hospital room. Lily frowned. That doesn't make sense. Dash has a wheelchair too, and he still lives with Officer Sullivan. It's complicated, Ethan began, but Lily was already shaking her head. Not really. Dogs don't care if you can walk or not. They just want to be with their people. She reached into her backpack and pulled out a small package. I made this for you, by the way. It's a courage kit, like the one I made for Dash when he first got his wheelchair. Caught off guard by the gift, Ethan accepted the package awkwardly. Thanks, I guess. You're supposed to open it, Lily prompted, earning a subtle headshake from her mother that she cheerfully ignored. With a slightly bewildered expression, Ethan unwrapped the package. Inside was a hand-drawn card showing Dash in his wheelchair, clearing what appeared to be a series of obstacles, along with a braided cord in blue and silver threads. The card shows Dash doing wheelchair agility. It's a real sport. I found videos online, Lily explained earnestly. And the bracelet is like the one I made for his harness. It's for good luck and courage, but also because it looks cool. Ethan stared at the items, his expression unreadable. When he finally spoke, his voice was slightly rough. "Why would you make this for me? You don't even know me." Lily seemed genuinely puzzled by the question. "Because you're going through something hard like Dash did. And sometimes it helps to know you're not the only one figuring things out." She glanced at Dash, who had remained attentive throughout the exchange. "Besides, Dash is a really good judge of character, and he obviously thinks you're worth helping." The simple logic of her response seemed to penetrate defenses that more sophisticated approaches had failed to breach. Ethan's carefully maintained mask of indifference slipped, revealing the vulnerable, frightened boy beneath the tough exterior. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "How to be this version of me." It was Dash who responded first, pressing his body more firmly against Ethan's leg in a gesture of unmistakable support. Sullivan recognized it as the same behavior the Border Collie had displayed with victims during rescue operations. A grounding presence, silent reassurance that they were no longer alone in their distress. "None of us do at first," Sullivan said quietly. "Not Dash, not me when I was trying to help him. We just figured it out one day at a time with a lot of help and plenty of mistakes along the way." Jennifer moved closer, resting a hand lightly on her daughter's shoulder. "That's why we thought meeting Dash might be helpful, Ethan. Not because your situations are identical, but because sometimes seeing someone else navigating a difficult journey can make your own path feel a little less impossible." Ethan looked down at the card and bracelet in his hands, then at Dash, still stationed faithfully by his side. Something shifted in his expression. Not a dramatic transformation, but the smallest opening of a door, long kept tightly shut. "Could..." He paused, then continued with more determination. "Could you maybe bring him again sometime? And tell me more about that wheelchair agility thing?" The question contained more hope than anything they had heard from him in their brief acquaintance. It was Sullivan's turn to feel a constriction in his throat as he recognized the significance of this small breakthrough. "I think Dash would like that very much," he replied, meeting Ethan's gaze directly. "He's always been a working dog at heart. Helping is what he does best." As they prepared to leave a while later, having arranged a time for their next visit, Sullivan watched Ethan carefully attach the braided cord to the arm of his wheelchair, positioning it where he could see it. The simple gesture spoke volumes about the impact of their visit and about the unexpected new purpose that had found them when they least expected it. The visit with Ethan marked the beginning of a new phase in Dash's journey. What had started as a tentative exploration of therapy work quickly evolved into a clear sense of purpose that seemed to energize both Dash and Sullivan. They established a regular schedule of visits to the pediatric rehabilitation wing, where Ethan had become Dash's most devoted advocate, proudly introducing the Border Collie to other young patients and explaining the wheelchair's mechanics with growing confidence. "Did you know his chair was custom built for his exact measurements?" Ethan would tell newcomers, detailing the specialized features as if he had designed them himself. "And see how the harness distributes his weight. That prevents pressure sores and keeps him comfortable even when he uses it all day." The change in Ethan himself was remarkable. His physical therapist reported increased engagement in his own rehabilitation sessions, a willingness to discuss adaptive equipment that he had previously rejected, and most significantly, a shift from focusing exclusively on walking again to exploring ways to be active and independent in his current situation. He asked about wheelchair sports programs yesterday, she told Sullivan during one of their visits. That's the first time he's shown interest in anything beyond traditional therapy. Whatever you and Dash are doing, it's making a difference. What they were doing, Sullivan reflected, was remarkably simple. They were showing up consistently, sharing their own struggles and triumphs honestly, and demonstrating through Dash's vibrant presence that mobility challenges didn't define a life's possibilities or worth. The impact extended beyond Ethan. Other young patients began looking forward to Dash's visits, and the hospital's therapeutic recreation specialist approached Sullivan about expanding their role to include structured activities designed around Dash's abilities. The kids see him as a peer in a way they don't relate to most therapy animals, she explained. The wheelchair creates an immediate point of connection. They're not just receiving comfort from him, they're identifying with him. This observation led to the development of a pilot program where Dash's therapy sessions became educational opportunities. Under careful supervision, young patients would help with his exercises, learning about anatomy, rehabilitation principles, and adaptive techniques that applied to their own recoveries as well. Sullivan found himself growing into this new role with unexpected ease. His search and rescue background had given him valuable skills in communicating calmly during stressful situations, breaking down complex tasks into manageable steps, and maintaining the delicate balance between encouragement and realism that rehabilitation required. "You're a natural at this," Jennifer commented after watching him guide a session where 3 young patients helped put Dash through a series of mobility exercises. "Have you ever considered pursuing certification as a therapy handler? It would allow you to expand this work beyond just the volunteer visits." Sullivan had been contemplating a similar evolution, though he hadn't voiced it yet. Their informal visits were making a meaningful difference, but professional certification would open doors to more structured therapeutic applications and potentially create a sustainable new career path that would accommodate Dash's needs while honoring his working dog heritage. "I'm looking into it," he admitted. "The search and rescue unit has been supportive about my reduced schedule while we focus on Dash's rehabilitation. But long-term, we both need something more defined." Meanwhile, Dash's own physical recovery continued to show incremental but significant progress. The experimental program at the university had moved him into a more advanced protocol after noting the promising neural activity in his left hind leg. The robotic exoskeleton sessions were now supplemented with targeted electrical stimulation that had produced increasingly coordinated muscle responses. "He's an excellent candidate for this approach," the research veterinarian explained during their 8th week in the program. His overall health, mental engagement, and the specific nature of his injury create an optimal scenario for neural recovery. The most dramatic development occurred during a routine hydrotherapy session at the rehabilitation center. Dash had been placed in the tank as usual, the warm water supporting his body weight, while the therapist guided his hind legs through the swimming motion. Sullivan stood nearby, offering encouragement as Dash paddled strongly with his front legs. Halfway through the session, the therapist had paused, her expression intent as she observed something beneath the water's surface. "Mark," she said quietly, I think he's initiating movement on his own. Watch his left hind leg." Sullivan moved closer to the tank, focusing on the indicated leg. Sure enough, there was a distinct paddling motion that occurred in rhythm with his front legs. Not just the passive movement created by the therapist's guidance or the water's resistance, but what appeared to be voluntary kicking. "Can you stop supporting that leg entirely?" Sullivan asked, hardly daring to hope. The therapist carefully released her hold on Dash's left hind leg while maintaining support of his right. The leg continued its motion, weaker than normal, but unmistakably active. "He's doing it himself," she confirmed, professional composure not quite masking her excitement. "It's not full strength, but that's definitely voluntary movement." The significance of this breakthrough was tempered by realistic medical assessment. Dr. Abrams, when shown the video Sullivan had recorded of the session, cautioned against expecting too much too quickly. "This is absolutely positive progress," he affirmed. "But remember, aquatic therapy creates a supported environment where even minimal neural connections can produce movement that might not translate to weight-bearing on land. We need to continue all aspects of his rehabilitation and see how this develops." Still, the moment represented a threshold crossed, a vindication of the intensive efforts they had invested in Dash's recovery. For Sullivan, who had once faced the heart-wrenching decision to end his partner's life, the sight of that swimming motion, however limited, felt nothing short of miraculous. News of Dash's progress spread quickly through their expanding network of supporters. Lily, who had appointed herself Dash's official progress tracker, added a special gold star to her chart and insisted on a celebration. Jennifer helped her organize a small gathering at their home, where Dash demonstrated his improving abilities to an appreciative audience that included Dr. Patel, Marina from the shelter, and several members of the search and rescue team who had been supporting their journey from the beginning. "I knew he could do it," Lily declared with absolute conviction as they watched Dash navigate an obstacle course she had designed to showcase his wheelchair skills while incorporating exercises for his recovering limbs. His brain just needed time to find new pathways to his legs. The gathering also served as a platform for Sullivan to share their evolving vision for Dash's future. He explained the therapy work they had been doing at the hospital, the impact they had witnessed, and their plans to pursue professional certification as a therapy team. "Whether or not Dash regains full use of his hind legs, we've found a new calling," Sullivan told the group. The skills that made him exceptional at search and rescue, his intelligence, his focus, his intuitive connection with people in distress, translate perfectly to this kind of work. The response was overwhelmingly supportive, particularly from his colleagues on the search and rescue team. They had watched Sullivan struggle with the fear of losing not just his partner, but his own sense of purpose in the aftermath of Dash's injury. Seeing them both find new meaning was as inspiring to these tough, practical professionals as any dramatic rescue operation. "You're still saving lives," his supervisor noted. "Just in a different way now." As summer progressed toward fall, Dash's therapy visits expanded to include regular sessions with Ethan and 3 other young patients who were dealing with various mobility challenges. They called themselves Team Dash, and under Sullivan's guidance had begun training the Border Collie in new skills, specifically designed to assist with their own therapy goals. One particularly meaningful development came from Ethan's growing interest in adaptive sports. After researching wheelchair agility competitions for dogs, he had become curious about parallel activities for humans. With encouragement from his therapists and inspiration from Dash, he had begun training for wheelchair basketball, displaying natural athletic talent that had lain dormant during his months of depression. "I've been thinking," Ethan said during one of their sessions, as he helped guide Dash through a series of cone-weaving exercises. "What if we created some kind of program where kids like me could work with dogs like Dash? Not just visits, but actual training partnerships." Sullivan, who had been considering similar possibilities, was impressed by Ethan's vision. "What exactly are you imagining? Like a program where kids in wheelchairs or with other physical challenges could help train and work with service or therapy dogs," Ethan explained, his eyes lighting up with enthusiasm. "The dogs get training, the kids learn skills and responsibility, and everyone benefits from the connection." The concept resonated strongly with Sullivan, who had witnessed firsthand the therapeutic value of giving Ethan and the other young patients agency in Dash's care rather than positioning them solely as recipients of therapy. "That's a brilliant idea," Sullivan told him sincerely. "It turns the traditional therapy animal model on its head, seeing the kids as capable contributors rather than just beneficiaries." "Exactly," Ethan exclaimed, more animated than Sullivan had ever seen him. "My physical therapist says working with Dash has improved my upper body strength and coordination more than regular exercises because I'm focused on helping him instead of thinking about my own limitations." This conversation marked another pivotal moment in their evolving journey, planting the seed for what would eventually become a formal program integrating animal-assisted therapy with adaptive sports and rehabilitation. Sullivan began discussing the concept with Jennifer, whose professional background in physical therapy provided valuable insights into how such a program might be structured to maximize therapeutic benefits while ensuring safety for both the young participants and the animals. "The medical literature supports this approach," she noted, as they outlined potential components of the program. "Therapy that engages patients as active participants rather than passive recipients typically shows better outcomes, especially with pediatric populations. And the psychological benefits of moving from being helped to being a helper are well documented." With characteristic thoroughness, Sullivan began researching existing models, reaching out to organizations that combined animal therapy with pediatric rehabilitation and exploring potential funding sources. The Cedar Cove Search and Rescue Unit offered their training facility as a possible venue for weekend sessions, and several local veterinarians expressed interest in providing pro bono services to support the initiative. Amidst this flurry of planning and possibility, Dash's own recovery continued its steady, if uneven, progression. The movement in his left hind leg became more consistent, eventually manifesting outside of the hydrotherapy environment. During land-based exercise sessions, he began showing the ability to flex and extend the limb with purpose, though it lacked the strength to support his weight. Dr. Abrams cautioned that this pattern of asymmetric recovery, one side improving while the other showed minimal change, was common in spinal cord injuries. The neural pathways on his left side appear to be re-establishing connections more successfully than on the right. This isn't unusual, and it doesn't mean the right side won't improve. But recovery is rarely perfectly symmetrical. For Sullivan, each small victory was worth celebrating while remaining focused on the larger journey. Whether Dash ultimately recovered enough function to walk unassisted or continued to use his wheelchair, the Border Collie had transcended his injury to find a new purpose that touched lives in ways neither of them could have imagined on that rainy April morning at Lighthouse Animal Shelter. As Sullivan watched Dash working confidently with the young patients, his natural herding instincts now channeled into gentle guidance and support. He reflected on the strange, winding path that had led them here. The devastating injury that had nearly ended Dash's life had instead transformed it, and in the process had transformed Sullivan's life as well, opening new horizons of possibility and connection. And it had all begun with the simple, profound wisdom of an 8-year-old girl who had seen not what was lost, but what might still be found. As autumn painted the trees around Cedar Cove in brilliant hues of orange and gold, the embryonic program that had begun with Dash and Ethan took on more formal structure. Sullivan had spent countless hours researching similar initiatives across the country, consulting with veterinary specialists, rehabilitation experts, and the families of the young patients who had formed the core of Team Dash. The result was a comprehensive proposal for what they now called positive mobility, an integrated program combining canine-assisted therapy with adaptive recreation for children and teens with mobility challenges. The Pediatric Rehabilitation Department at Cedar Cove Medical Center had enthusiastically endorsed the concept, offering to provide clinical oversight and access to their facilities for indoor activities during the approaching winter months. Several local veterinarians had volunteered their services, and a grant application had been submitted to a national foundation that supported innovative approaches to pediatric rehabilitation. The beauty of this program is that it addresses multiple needs simultaneously, Jennifer explained during a presentation to potential community sponsors. The children improve their physical capabilities while developing confidence and purpose. The dogs receive training and stimulation that enhances their own rehabilitation. And beyond the individual benefits, we're creating a model that challenges how society views both disability and human-animal partnerships. Sullivan, watching from the side of the room with Dash seated attentively beside him, felt a surge of pride in how far they had come. The Border Collie was wearing his therapy dog vest rather than sitting in his wheelchair, a reflection of the remarkable progress in his physical recovery. While he still used the wheelchair for longer excursions, Dash had developed sufficient strength and coordination in his left hind leg to support himself for short periods with only a supportive brace on his weaker right leg. Dr. Abrams had been cautiously optimistic about this development. The neural regeneration we're seeing exceeds typical expectations for this type of injury, he had noted during their most recent evaluation. I attribute it to the perfect storm of factors: the intensive rehabilitation, his overall health and fitness prior to the injury, his age, and perhaps most importantly, his extraordinary mental engagement. The brain-body connection is powerful, and Dash has remained cognitively stimulated throughout this process. The practical impact of this recovery was significant. Dash could now transition between his wheelchair and independent movement as needed, conserving energy during longer activities, but exercising his recovering muscles during therapy sessions. This flexibility had expanded his therapeutic applications, allowing him to demonstrate adaptive techniques while also modeling recovery possibilities. For the young patients who worked with him, this visible progress was perhaps the most powerful aspect of their interaction with Dash. Watching him gradually reclaim abilities that had been lost created a tangible sense of hope and possibility. As 10-year-old Maya, one of the newer members of Team Dash, had expressed during a therapy session, "If Dash can learn to walk again after the doctors thought he never would, maybe I can surprise everyone too." This perspective was precisely what had inspired Sullivan and Jennifer to formalize the Positive Mobility Program. Beyond the physical benefits of the human-canine interactions, they recognized the profound psychological impact of shifting the narrative from limitation to potential, from what was lost to what might still be discovered. The format they had developed integrated several components, each building on Dash's initial work with Ethan. The core elements included physical therapy, partnerships where children undergoing rehabilitation worked alongside dogs with similar mobility challenges, performing exercises that benefited both species while creating mutual motivation. Adaptive skills, training, teaching young people with disabilities to assist in the care and training of therapy animals, developing confidence and capability through helping others. Mobility equipment, innovation, engaging participants in the design and testing of adaptive equipment for both humans and canines, fostering problem-solving skills and practical engineering experience, community education outreach, where the teams of children and dogs provided demonstrations and education to schools and organizations, challenging perceptions about disability and showcasing capabilities rather than limitations. The first official pilot session was scheduled for early November, with 8 young participants already enrolled and 4 dogs, including Dash, selected to participate. In addition to Dash, the canine team included a golden retriever recovering from surgery for hip dysplasia, a German shepherd with a prosthetic front leg, and a Labrador mix who had been born with a congenital limb deformity. Each dog brings different strengths and challenges to the program, Sullivan explained to the volunteer handlers during their orientation session. And each has a unique story that resonates with our participants in different ways. Our goal is to match children with the dog that best complements their specific therapy goals and personal connection. The preparation was meticulous, with protocols developed for every aspect of the program, from hygiene standards to emergency procedures. Sullivan had completed his certification as a therapy dog handler, and Dash had passed his formal therapy dog evaluation with exceptional scores. The Border Collie's natural intelligence, combined with his search and rescue background and his own rehabilitation experience, made him ideally suited for this specialized work. As the launch date approached, Sullivan found himself reflecting on the extraordinary chain of events that had led them to this point. Less than 8 months earlier, he had sat in a quiet room at Lighthouse Animal Shelter, preparing to say goodbye to his beloved partner. Now they stood on the threshold of pioneering a program that could potentially help countless children and animals. The night before the pilot session, Sullivan took Dash for a quiet walk along the lakeshore. The Border Collie moved with determined care, his gait still showing the asymmetry of his recovery, but his spirit undimmed by the lingering limitations. They paused at a favorite overlook, watching the moonlight ripple across the water's surface. "We've come a long way, haven't we, buddy?" Sullivan murmured, kneeling beside his companion. Dash pressed against him in response, his warm presence a constant through all the changes and challenges they had navigated together. The inaugural session of positive mobility exceeded even Sullivan's carefully tempered expectations. The rehabilitation gym at Cedar Cove Medical Center had been transformed for the occasion, with activity stations arranged around the perimeter and a central area for group exercises. Each station addressed specific therapeutic goals while incorporating interaction with the therapy dogs. Ethan, who had been instrumental in developing the program concept, had requested to be paired with Dash for this first session. As the most experienced of the young participants, he took on an informal leadership role, demonstrating techniques for the newer members and sharing insights from his months of working with Dash. The most important thing to remember, he told a hesitant 7-year-old girl who was new to both therapy and dogs, is that Dash doesn't care if you do everything perfectly. He just enjoys working with you, and sometimes when your body won't cooperate exactly how you want, he understands that better than people do. This perspective, coming from a peer rather than an adult authority figure, seemed to resonate deeply with the children. Throughout the session, Sullivan observed moments of remarkable connection. A normally withdrawn boy laughing as he brushed. The golden retriever, a girl with limited upper body strength, pushing herself to complete an obstacle course alongside the German shepherd. Twins with cerebral palsy, carefully practicing hand signals to guide the Labrador mix through a series of tasks. The physical therapists circulated throughout the activities, offering guidance and making notes on each child's engagement and capabilities. One of them paused beside Sullivan, midway through the session, her expression reflecting professional assessment mixed with genuine wonder. "I've been working with some of these kids for months," she said quietly. "The physical progress we're seeing today, increased range of motion, improved coordination, enhanced stamina, typically takes weeks of conventional therapy to achieve, and the psychological engagement is off the charts." Sullivan nodded, watching, as Dash patiently demonstrated a modified sit-stand exercise that Ethan then replicated in his wheelchair. It's the partnership aspect. They're not focusing on their own limitations or recovery. They're focused on connecting with the dogs. The therapeutic benefit comes almost as a side effect of that engagement. By the end of the 2-hour session, both the human and canine participants showed signs of fatigue, but the atmosphere remained charged with accomplishment and possibility. Parents who arrived for pickup found their children eagerly demonstrating newly learned skills or introducing them to their canine therapy partners. Ethan's mother, who had been initially skeptical about the program, approached Sullivan with tears in her eyes. "I haven't seen him this animated in months," she said. "Last night he was talking about college programs in veterinary physical therapy. Before the accident, he never thought beyond the next basketball game. Now he's planning a future, a purpose." The success of the pilot session catalyzed community support for positive mobility. Local media coverage attracted attention from regional disability advocacy organizations, and several veterinary supply companies offered to donate specialized equipment for the canine participants. Within weeks, they had secured sufficient funding to extend the program through the winter months and expand to accommodate more participants. For Dash, the work seemed to accelerate his own recovery. The regular, purposeful activity combined with the cognitive stimulation of training sessions appeared to strengthen the neural pathways that were re-establishing connections to his hind legs. By early December, he was able to stand independently for short periods without his supportive brace, and during particularly focused activities, he would momentarily bear weight on his right hind leg as well as his left. Dr. Abrams documented these improvements with careful assessments, incorporating Dash's case into his research on recovery patterns in canines with spinal injuries. What we're observing challenges conventional timelines for neural regeneration, he noted during a presentation to colleagues at the university. The integration of purposeful activity with standard rehabilitation protocols appears to enhance recovery outcomes significantly. The implications extended beyond Dash's individual case. The principles being applied through positive mobility, combining physical rehabilitation with meaningful work, creating reciprocal therapeutic relationships, focusing on capability rather than limitation, offered a model that could potentially transform approaches to rehabilitation for both humans and animals. As the program grew, so did the network of specialists contributing to its development. A veterinary orthopedic surgeon volunteered to consult on adaptive equipment design, bringing insights from canine prosthetics that could be applied to human mobility devices. A child psychologist began documenting the emotional and social benefits of the human-animal partnerships, developing assessment tools to measure improvements in confidence, resilience, and self-efficacy. The Search and Rescue Unit, which had supported Sullivan and Dash throughout their journey, integrated aspects of the positive mobility approach into their own handler training. They invited Sullivan to conduct workshops on adaptive techniques and alternative communication methods, recognizing that these skills could enhance their effectiveness in working with individuals with disabilities during rescue operations. Perhaps most significantly, several rehabilitation centers in neighboring communities expressed interest in replicating the program model. By January, Sullivan and Jennifer were developing a comprehensive guide that would allow other facilities to implement similar initiatives, adapting the core principles to their specific resources and populations. Throughout this period of rapid evolution and expansion, Sullivan maintained a steadfast focus on the individual relationships at the heart of the program. Each session began and ended with one-on-one time between the human and canine participants, establishing a foundation of connection that supported the therapeutic work. He understood from his years in search and rescue that the bond between handler and dog was not merely a facilitator of the work, but an essential component of its effectiveness. This philosophy was embodied in his own continuing partnership with Dash. Despite the Border Collie's remarkable progress and their increasingly public role as advocates for adaptive therapy, they preserved the quiet routines that had sustained them through the darkest days after the injury. Each morning began with gentle exercises to maintain Dash's recovering muscle tone. Each evening ended with a period of focused connection, sometimes training, sometimes play, sometimes simply being together in companionable silence. On a crisp January morning, exactly 9 months since the day Dash was scheduled to be euthanized, Sullivan took him to the lake for a private celebration of how far they had come. The Border Collie wore his supportive brace, but not his wheelchair, moving with careful determination across the winter-hardened ground. They followed a familiar path to the water's edge, where the rising sun cast long shadows across the frozen surface of the lake. Sullivan unclipped Dash's leash, allowing him freedom to explore at his own pace. The Border Collie moved with increasing confidence, his gait still showing the telltale asymmetry of his partial recovery, but his joy in movement unmistakable. He investigated interesting scents, alert and engaged with his environment in a way that had once seemed impossible to reclaim. Watching his partner navigate the world on his own terms, Sullivan felt a profound sense of completion. Their journey was far from over. Dash's recovery would continue, and positive mobility was still in its infancy. But they had transcended the crisis that had threatened to end not just Dash's life, but a partnership that had proven more resilient and adaptable than either of them could have imagined on that rainy April morning. By mid-February, positive mobility had outgrown its initial home in the rehabilitation gym at Cedar Cove Medical Center. The program now served 16 children and teens with various mobility challenges, working with 6 therapy dogs in different stages of their own rehabilitation journeys. The search and rescue unit had offered their training facility as a more permanent location, providing both indoor and outdoor spaces that could accommodate the expanding activities. The transition to this new venue coincided with an unexpected opportunity. A documentary filmmaker who specialized in stories about innovative approaches to therapy had discovered positive mobility through a veterinary journal article about Dash's remarkable recovery. After observing several sessions, she approached Sullivan and Jennifer with a proposal to document the program's development and impact. "What you've created here deserves to be shared more widely," she explained during their initial meeting. "There are countless families struggling with the same challenges your participants faced, believing they're alone in that journey. And there are dogs being euthanized because their owners can't envision a path forward after a serious injury." Sullivan had been initially hesitant, concerned about preserving the dignity and privacy of the young participants. However, when he raised these concerns with the families involved, their response surprised him. Far from being reluctant, they were enthusiastic about sharing their experiences. "People need to see this," Ethan's mother had insisted. "Before we found Dash and this program, we felt like we were drowning in a sea of can't and won't and never again. If our story helps even one family find hope when everything seems hopeless, how can we keep it to ourselves?" With the family's support, Sullivan agreed to the documentary project under specific conditions. The dignity of both the human and canine participants would be paramount. The focus would remain on capabilities rather than limitations, and the film would provide practical information about implementing similar programs in other communities. The documentary process itself became an unexpected extension of the therapeutic environment. The young participants embraced the opportunity to articulate their experiences, finding new confidence in sharing the expertise they had developed through working with the dogs. Seeing themselves through the filmmaker's lens, captured in moments of accomplishment, connection, and joy, reinforced their evolving self-image as capable, resourceful individuals whose value wasn't defined by their physical limitations. For Sullivan, the documentation process prompted deeper reflection on the principles that had emerged as central to positive mobility's effectiveness. In preparation for on-camera interviews, he worked with Jennifer to articulate the core philosophy that had developed somewhat organically through their months of hands-on experience. The traditional therapeutic model often positions the person with a disability as a passive recipient of intervention, he explained during one of these sessions. What we've discovered is the transformative power of reciprocity, creating scenarios where our participants are both receiving help and providing it, where their unique insights and abilities are valued as essential contributions rather than incidental benefits. This principle of reciprocity extended to the relationships between the human and canine participants. Rather than positioning the dogs as merely therapeutic tools, the program recognized them as partners with their own recovery, journeys, needs, and capabilities. This mutual recognition created connections that transcended the typical dynamics of both animal-assisted therapy and pet ownership, establishing instead a collaborative relationship built on shared experience and mutual support. As filming progressed, the documentary began to capture the ripple effects of these relationships, extending beyond the formal program sessions. Families reported significant changes in their children's approach to daily challenges, from increased willingness to attempt difficult physical tasks to greater resilience when facing setbacks. Several participants had begun volunteering at local animal shelters, applying the skills they had learned with their canine therapy partners to help other animals in need. Perhaps most remarkably, 2 of the families had adopted dogs with mobility challenges of their own, inspired by their children's experiences in the program. These adoptions created continued therapeutic benefits at home, while providing loving families for animals that might otherwise have been considered unadoptable. One such adoption involved Tyler, a 9-year-old participant who used forearm crutches due to a congenital condition affecting his lower limbs. After 6 months in the program, working primarily with a golden retriever named Sunny, who had hip dysplasia, Tyler had convinced his initially reluctant parents to visit Lighthouse Animal Shelter. There they met Pepper, a 3-year-old Australian cattle dog mix who had lost one hind leg after being struck by a car. Despite his missing limb, Pepper demonstrated the characteristic energy and intelligence of his breed, adapting his movement patterns to maintain balance and agility. Tyler had immediately recognized a kindred spirit in the 3-legged dog, and the connection was mutual. "He moves like I do sometimes," Tyler had told his parents, watching Pepper navigate an obstacle course the shelter staff had set up to showcase his abilities. "He figures out his own way to get where he wants to go." The adoption had proven transformative for both Tyler and Pepper. The daily responsibility of caring for his dog motivated Tyler to strengthen his own physical capabilities, while Pepper's unwavering enthusiasm provided constant encouragement. Most significantly, Tyler's perspective on his own condition began to shift, influenced by his observations of Pepper's matter-of-fact approach to adaptation. "Pepper doesn't waste time wishing he had 4 legs," Tyler explained to the documentary filmmaker during a segment about their relationship. "He just works with what he has and gets on with having fun and doing dog stuff. I'm trying to be more like that." Stories like Tyler and Pepper's underscored the fundamental insight that had guided positive mobility from its inception. Physical challenges, whether in humans or animals, need not define identity or limit potential when approached with creativity, support, and an emphasis on discovering new possibilities rather than dwelling on lost capabilities. This philosophy extended to Dash's continuing recovery as well. By early spring, the Border Collie had progressed to using his supportive brace only during extended activities, managing shorter periods with completely independent mobility. His gait remained asymmetrical, with his left side significantly stronger than his right, but he had adapted his movement patterns to compensate for this imbalance with remarkable efficiency. Dr. Abrams, who continued to document Dash's progress as part of his research, noted that the Border Collie's neural recovery had surpassed expectations for his type of injury. We're seeing continued improvement even beyond the typical recovery window, he explained during Dash's one-year assessment. This challenges our understanding of neural plasticity in canines and suggests that meaningful engagement may play a more significant role in recovery outcomes than previously recognized. The implications of these findings extended beyond veterinary medicine, attracting interest from researchers in human rehabilitation as well. A neurologist specializing in spinal cord injuries began collaborating with Dr. Abrams, seeking parallels between Dash's recovery pattern and similar cases in human patients. Their preliminary research suggested that the principles applied in Dash's rehabilitation, particularly the integration of purposeful activity with traditional physical therapy, might have applications across species. This cross-disciplinary interest led to an invitation for Sullivan and Dash to present at a regional conference on innovative approaches to rehabilitation. The prospect of sharing their experience with medical professionals initially intimidated Sullivan, who had never envisioned himself in such an academic role. However, the documentary process had helped him articulate the insights gained through their journey, and Jennifer's professional background provided valuable guidance in translating their practical experience into the language of clinical application. The presentation itself proved to be a powerful validation of how far they had come. Sullivan spoke about the evolution of their approach, from the desperate search for options in those early weeks after Dash's injury, to the development of a comprehensive program that now served dozens of participants. Throughout the presentation, Dash remained at his side, a living embodiment of the possibilities that existed beyond conventional prognoses. During the question and answer session that followed, a rehabilitation physician asked about the role of hope in recovery outcomes, specifically how to balance realistic expectations with the potential benefits of optimism. Sullivan considered the question carefully before responding. When Dash was first injured, I was told that euthanasia was the kindest option because the likelihood of meaningful recovery was too small to justify the challenges of caring for a paralyzed dog. That assessment wasn't wrong based on the statistical probabilities, but it failed to account for the immeasurable variables: his individual resilience, the resources we might discover, the support that would emerge from unexpected places. He glanced down at Dash, who sat alertly beside him, present in every sense of the word. What I've learned through this journey is that hope isn't about denying reality or clinging to improbable outcomes. It's about remaining open to possibilities beyond our current understanding or expectations. It's recognizing that statistics describe populations, not individuals, and that each recovery journey has its own unique potential. This perspective resonated deeply with the medical professionals in attendance, many of whom navigated the delicate balance between realism and optimism in their daily work with patients. Several approached Sullivan afterward, sharing their own experiences with cases that had defied conventional prognoses and expressing interest in incorporating aspects of the positive mobility model into their practice. The conference presentation marked another milestone in the expanding influence of the program. Inquiries began arriving from rehabilitation centers across the country, requesting guidance on implementing similar initiatives. In response, Sullivan and Jennifer developed a series of webinars and training materials, making their approach accessible to a wider audience while emphasizing the need for adaptation to local resources and specific populations. Throughout this period of growth and external recognition, Sullivan remained grounded in the day-to-day work of the program and in his evolving partnership with Dash. The Border Collie's progress continued, with subtle improvements in strength and coordination that accumulated gradually but steadily. By late spring, he could manage short play sessions without any supportive equipment, though he still used his brace for longer activities and more demanding terrain. On the anniversary of their first visit to Ethan at the hospital, the interaction that had ultimately led to the creation of Positive Mobility, Sullivan organized a special celebration for all the program participants and their families. The event was held at the search and rescue facility that now served as their permanent home, transformed for the occasion into a festival of achievement and possibility. Each human canine team demonstrated skills and activities they had mastered. Through the program, from basic mobility exercises to complex agility sequences adapted for their specific capabilities. The demonstrations were followed by an award ceremony where every participant received recognition for their unique contributions and accomplishments. Ethan, who had recently transitioned to a role as a junior instructor in the program, presented Dash with a special award, a custom-made medallion attached to his therapy vest, commemorating his role as the founding dog of Positive Mobility. The Border Collie accepted the honor with characteristic dignity, his alert, intelligent expression reflecting the unwavering focus that had defined him throughout his journey from search and rescue hero to rehabilitation pioneer. As Sullivan watched the celebration unfold around them, he found himself marveling at the extraordinary chain of events that had brought them to this point. The devastating injury that had nearly ended Dash's life had instead become the catalyst for a program that was transforming dozens of lives and challenging fundamental assumptions about rehabilitation, disability, and the healing potential of human-animal partnerships. At the center of it all was the Border Collie, who had defied expectations at every turn. From those first tentative movements in his wheelchair, to his current status as a therapy dog whose own recovery journey inspired everyone he encountered. And alongside Dash was the network of supporters who had made that journey possible. Dr. Abrams with his medical expertise, Jennifer with her professional insights, the families who had embraced the program's vision, and, perhaps most pivotally, a young girl whose simple belief in possibilities had arrived at exactly the moment when it was most needed. As if summoned by this thought, Lily appeared at Sullivan's side, having just completed a demonstration with one of the newer therapy dogs in the program. Now 9 years old, she had grown slightly taller, but remained the same exuberant spirit who had walked into that room at Lighthouse Animal Shelter and changed everything with her refusal to accept limitations as final. Dash is looking really strong today, she observed, kneeling to greet the Border Collie with the gentle confidence that had characterized their relationship from the beginning. Remember when he got his first wheelchair and was so confused by it? Now look at him, he barely needs any help at all. Sullivan smiled, recognizing in her words the simple truth that had guided them through every phase of their remarkable journey. What begins in struggle often leads to strength. What appears as an ending frequently conceals a beginning. And sometimes, the most profound wisdom arrives in the most unexpected packages, like the unshakable faith of a child who sees possibilities. When others see only problems, the summer brought new dimensions to the Positive Mobility program. With the warmer weather, Activities expanded to include outdoor sessions that introduced participants to adaptive recreational opportunities beyond the controlled environment of the training facility. Sullivan had worked with local outdoor adventure specialists to develop modified kayaking, fishing, and nature exploration experiences that accommodated various mobility challenges while fostering independence and confidence. These outdoor programs created natural opportunities for the documentary team to capture the evolving capabilities of both the human and canine participants. Filming Ethan maneuvering his wheelchair along a specially designed nature trail with Dash trotting confidently beside him, the Border Collie now using only a lightweight supportive sleeve on his weaker right hind leg, provided powerful visual evidence of how far they had both come in their parallel journeys of recovery and adaptation. We wanted to show that mobility challenges don't have to mean disconnection from nature and outdoor experiences, Sullivan explained during an interview for the documentary. Many of our participants had been told, explicitly or implicitly, that certain environments were simply off-limits to them now. Part of our mission is challenging those assumptions and finding creative ways to restore access to experiences that nurture both physical and emotional well-being. This philosophy was embodied in the program's signature summer event, a 3-day adaptive camping trip at a lakeside location that had been modified to accommodate participants with mobility challenges. The expedition included 8 young participants, their family members, 4 therapy dogs, including Dash, and a support team of medical professionals, program staff, and volunteers from the Search and Rescue Unit. Preparing for this ambitious undertaking required months of careful planning. Sullivan worked with outdoor accessibility experts to identify and modify a suitable campsite, ensuring that all essential areas were navigable by wheelchair while still preserving the authentic camping experience. Specialized equipment was sourced or adapted, from all-terrain wheelchairs that could handle rougher surfaces to modified camping gear that could be managed independently by participants with limited mobility. The therapy dogs underwent additional training to prepare them for the new environment, focusing on reliable recall in open spaces and appropriate behavior around wildlife and campfires. Dash, with his search and rescue background, took to this training with particular enthusiasm. Despite his lingering mobility limitations, his Border Collie instincts remained sharp, and he demonstrated exceptional awareness of potential hazards in the natural environment. He still thinks like a working dog, Sullivan noted to Dr. Abrams during a final veterinary check before the expedition. Even with the physical changes, his mind is fully engaged in assessing situations and solving problems. That cognitive function seems to be driving his continued physical improvement, Dr. Abrams agreed, documenting Dash's latest progress in his ongoing research. The neural pathways are continually adapting and finding new routes around the damaged areas. What's particularly interesting in Dash's case is the asymmetrical nature of his recovery. His left side now functions at nearly 90% of normal capacity, while his right remains at about 60%. Yet he's developed compensation patterns that allow for remarkably efficient mobility despite this imbalance. This observation held significance beyond Dash's individual case. The patterns of his recovery were informing Dr. Abrams' research into targeted rehabilitation approaches that could potentially benefit both canine and human patients with similar injuries. The principles that had emerged from Dash's journey, early intervention, consistent physical therapy, cognitive engagement, and meaningful activity, were being incorporated into treatment protocols at veterinary rehabilitation centers across the region. The camping expedition itself became a vibrant demonstration of these principles in action. Each day began with modified yoga sessions on the lakeshore, where participants and their therapy dogs moved through adapted poses designed to improve flexibility, strength, and balance. These sessions, led by a physical therapist with specialized training in adaptive movement, incorporated the dogs as both motivational partners and physical supports. Mornings were dedicated to water-based activities, taking advantage of the natural buoyancy provided by the lake environment. For participants like Ethan, who had progressed from complete resistance to therapy to enthusiastic engagement with adaptive sports, swimming with specially designed flotation devices offered a rare experience of movement unencumbered by wheelchairs or mobility aids. The therapy dogs participated in these water activities as well, with Dash demonstrating particular aptitude for the aquatic environment. His swimming had become notably stronger since his initial hydrotherapy sessions, and he now moved through the water with fluid grace that belied his lingering limitations on land. For the children who were apprehensive about water activities, watching the dogs navigate the lake with confidence provided both inspiration and a sense of security. Afternoons featured land-based exploration using all-terrain wheelchairs and adaptive hiking equipment. Sullivan drew on his search and rescue experience to create modified orienteering challenges that engaged participants in navigating terrain while identifying natural landmarks and wildlife. These activities developed practical skills while fostering a sense of mastery and connection with the natural environment that many had feared was permanently lost to them. Evenings around the campfire became opportunities for reflection and community building. Parents and siblings shared observations about changes they had witnessed in their children since joining the program. Many spoke of renewed engagement with family activities, increased willingness to attempt new challenges, and most significantly, a fundamental shift in how the children viewed their own capabilities and future possibilities. Before we found positive mobility, Maya wouldn't talk about any plans beyond next week, one mother shared, referring to her 10-year-old daughter, who had sustained a spinal cord injury in a car accident the previous year. Now, she's researching colleges with strong veterinary programs because she wants to specialize in rehabilitation for injured animals. She has a future orientation again, not just accepting what happened to her, but finding purpose in it. Tyler, the 9-year-old who had adopted Pepper the 3-legged cattle dog, demonstrated how his relationship with his canine companion had transformed his approach to his own congenital mobility challenges. During a nature photography activity, Tyler navigated challenging terrain with determination and creativity, adapting his movement techniques to accommodate the environment rather than expecting the environment to accommodate him. Pepper taught me that there's always another way to get where you want to go, he explained to the documentary crew as they filmed him, carefully positioning his crutches on an uneven section of trail. He doesn't waste energy wishing things were different. He just figures out how to work with what he's got. For Ethan, who had been with the program from its inception, the camping trip represented a milestone in his evolving identity as both a recipient and provider of support. Now 13, he had taken on increasing responsibility within positive mobility, transitioning from participant to junior assistant, who helped integrate new members into the program. During the expedition, he led several peer-to-peer activities, sharing techniques and insights he had developed through his months of working with Dash. The most important thing I've learned, he told a group of younger participants during an adaptive fishing session, is that struggling with something doesn't mean you can't do it. It just means you haven't figured out your way of doing it yet. And sometimes, the way you figure out works better than the regular way, even though it looks different. This philosophy, focusing on function rather than form, on accomplishment rather than methodology, had become a cornerstone of the positive mobility approach. It challenged traditional rehabilitation models that often emphasized restoring normal movement patterns, offering instead a paradigm that valued effective adaptation and individual problem-solving. The documentary captured numerous examples of this principle in action throughout the camping expedition. A girl with limited hand dexterity developing her own technique for securing her life jacket with the assistance of her therapy dog. A boy with one functional arm creating an adaptive system for setting up his tent. Children with various mobility challenges working together to develop a modified version of Capture the Flag that accommodated their diverse capabilities. For Sullivan, observing these moments of creativity and collaboration reinforced his evolving understanding of recovery, not as a linear progression toward a predetermined normal state, but as a dynamic process of discovering new capabilities and connections. This perspective had transformed his approach to Dash's continuing rehabilitation as well, shifting from focusing exclusively on regaining lost function to developing and refining adaptive strategies that maximize the Border Collie's formidable intelligence and determination. On the final evening of the camping expedition, as the participants gathered around the campfire for a closing ceremony, Sullivan found himself reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had brought them all to this moment. What had begun in crisis and near despair had blossomed into a community of mutual support and shared purpose that none of them could have imagined on that rainy April morning at Lighthouse Animal Shelter. The ceremony itself embodied the spirit of the program, with each participant receiving recognition not for achieving predetermined milestones, but for their unique contributions to the community. Some were acknowledged for their creativity and problem solving, others for their perseverance through challenges, still others for the emotional support they provided to fellow participants or their canine partners. When it came time to recognize Dash, it was Lily who stepped forward to present the Border Collie with a special bandana embroidered with paw prints and the words Trailblazer. Now 9 years old, she had continued her role as Dash's most devoted advocate, regularly developing new training activities and celebrating each increment of his ongoing recovery with unflagging enthusiasm. Dash isn't just a therapy dog, she announced to the gathered community, her voice carrying clearly across the firelit circle. He's a teacher who shows us that being different doesn't mean being less. And he's proof that sometimes the experts can be wrong about what's possible, if you just keep trying and believe in yourself. The simple wisdom of her statement resonated deeply with everyone present, encapsulating as it did the fundamental insight that had guided positive mobility from its inception. That limitations, whether physical or perceptual, need not define the boundaries of potential when approached with creativity, determination, and collective support. As the expedition concluded and the participants returned to their daily lives, the impact of the experience continued to reverberate through the program and beyond. The documentary footage from the camping trip provided compelling visual evidence of the program's effectiveness, capturing moments of achievement, connection, and joy that transcended conventional notions of disability and rehabilitation. When the first rough cut of the documentary was screened for the participants and their families in late summer, the response was overwhelmingly positive. Seeing themselves through this lens, portrayed not as objects of pity or inspiration, but as active, engaged individuals navigating challenges with creativity and determination, reinforced the shifting self-perception that was perhaps the most profound outcome of their involvement with positive mobility. For Sullivan and Dash, the screening was yet another milestone in a journey that continued to evolve in unexpected ways. Watching the Border Collie's progress documented on film, from those early, tentative movements in his wheelchair to his current level of mobility, where the wheelchair was now reserved only for his most demanding activities, provided a powerful reminder of how far they had come together. As summer transitioned into fall, bringing with it the one-year anniversary of Positive Mobility's formal establishment, Sullivan found himself thinking often of the conversation with Dr. Abrams that had catalyzed their shift from managing Dash's disability to reimagining his purpose. What had seemed at the time like the reluctant acceptance of limitation had instead become the gateway to possibilities neither of them could have envisioned. This perspective informed Sullivan's approach as Positive Mobility entered its second year, expanding both its direct services and its role in advocating for integrated approaches to human and animal rehabilitation. The program that had begun with one injured dog and one determined child had grown into a model that was being replicated in communities across the country, challenging conventional boundaries between human and veterinary medicine, between therapy, recipient and provider, between limitation and possibility. And at the heart of it all remained the extraordinary partnership between a man and his dog, a bond that had weathered crisis, traversed uncertainty, and emerged not merely intact, but transformed, deepened by shared vulnerability and mutual dependence into something that transcended conventional definitions of handler and working dog to become something both simpler and more profound. Two beings finding their way forward together, one step at a time. 2 years after that fateful day at Lighthouse Animal Shelter, Dash stood beside Officer Sullivan as they welcomed the newest member of the Positive Mobility program, a young German shepherd who had lost the use of her hind legs in an accident. As Dash approached, moving with his characteristic determination, the shepherd's eyes lit up with recognition of a kindred spirit. The documentary about their journey had reached millions, inspiring similar programs nationwide. Veterinarians now routinely referred owners of injured dogs to Positive Mobility instead of suggesting euthanasia. Lily, now 10, still visited regularly, bringing new ideas and unwavering enthusiasm. Watching Dash demonstrate to the newcomer how to navigate in a wheelchair, Sullivan reflected on how one child's simple belief in possibilities had not only saved his partner's life, but transformed countless others. Sometimes the greatest miracles begin with the smallest act of faith. If you've been inspired by Dash's incredible journey, don't forget to subscribe for more heartwarming stories of hope, resilience, and the amazing bond between humans and animals. Hit that subscribe button now and join our community.